Good evening. It is my great pleasure to be in Portland and here at Lewis and Clark College to talk to you about Nigeria and big oil. Regardless of what I tell you tonight, it is always warm in my heart as well, the summer in my heart. We go to Nigeria, which is where I come from. The Niger Delta region of Nigeria. By the way, all of you know where Nigeria is at. It is in Africa, western part of Africa. And it has a little portion of it. It's not a little, but quite sizable, but significant part of it that is referred to as the Niger Delta area. And that is the place of contention today. That area is referred to as the Niger Delta area because simply, geographically, it is where the river Niger empties itself into the Atlantic Ocean with the help of course, thousands of lakes, tributaries, rivers, streams, mangroves, all kinds of things you can imagine that has to do with the delta is right there in Nigeria. So, but this portion of land referred to as Niger Delta, incidentally, is also the richest part or spot of land anywhere, perhaps in Africa, in terms of oil deposits. So, oil exploration started in 1956, and that is where I'm going to begin, because if we're going to talk about what happened before 1956 to Nigerians or the people in the area, it's going to take another symposium, a whole day. So we'll start from 1956 when the first rig was drilled onto the ground by Shell to explore oil. And what comes out of that process of exploration is, of course, crude oil. Most of you have never seen crude oil before, but I have seen it. And I can tell you, testify to the fact that crude oil looks pretty ugly. It just looks crude. And if you've ever seen the gadgets that are used in the drilling of crude oil, they look pretty ugly too. The rigs, they're just metals, that look very ugly in my own opinion. But there's also another angle to it. Two institutions that are very ugly too and crude, that is our government and the oil multinational corporations. So the combination of all these factors is what I'm talking about, or what I'm going to talk about today, because it has left the Niger Delta environment both systemically and systematically destroyed over the years. Let me give you an idea of what we're talking about. Nigeria exports 2.5 million barrels of oil every day. And we are the 6th largest producer of oil in the world. By my own little calculation, when I checked before I came here, the US consumes 25% of Nigerian oil. So, as a matter of fact, during the Gulf crisis, when Iraq was in trouble and Venezuela was in disagreement, we moved on to maybe number 4. So, and now that there's a general threat against the US in the Middle East, the US has gotten more interested, the United States government or consumer has gotten more interested in Nigerian oil. So they are focusing more in that region to explore more oil. It is so. But how does it affect me? It is the fact that in growing up, in my lifetime, I'm 35 years old now, I have seen the practical destruction of environment, of ecosystems, of rivers, of lakes, of forests that used to be lush green. I've seen it. How I saw it is that I was born and lived there. But most importantly also, as part of my education growing up, I traveled extensively with my father. We didn't fly anywhere, we didn't drive anywhere, we just traveled in the Niger Delta area in canoes. Canoes dug out by my father. My father he makes canoes. He also hunts crocodiles. He fishes. He does all kinds of things. My father is like super talented, And there came also super talented children that asked a lot of questions. So apart from hunting crocodiles, my father is actually a teacher. So it requires that he teaches far away from his hometown. That's part of the rule. They have to transfer teachers to different stations of those local schools. So we would accompany my dad on this, teaching expenditure, that also involves him carrying a den gun to shoot on the way, fish on the way. But my dad is a man out of control. He paddles the canoe, and sometimes we would go for a whole day. It's like traveling from New York to Washington, Seattle by air, just to get to the station for 6 hours, sometimes 12 hours. We'd just be rowing the boat gradually because we couldn't afford engine boats. His salary couldn't support that. So we were experts. Myself and my half-brother were experts in asking questions from my dad as little kids. And my own particular interest was just the environment, because as we rowed the boat from our village, which is more on the hinterland, you say, in the north, towards the south, you just discover going on how systemically the environment, just changes. So you can see it on the ground that, the water that used to be like pure and colorless becomes white, and then it becomes kind of darker and brownish like tea, and then it becomes really black, and then it becomes brackish, and then as you go nearer to the Atlantic Ocean, it becomes like sludge. But we didn't know what it was. Nobody taught us. It's not part of civics in Nigeria to be taught that all these changes in the environment had a source. But for that, actually, let me shock you that the kind of education that our parents had is such that they had been conditioned, if not warned directly, not to let out this secret to children, just like your parents won't let people curse around you here. Not to let out the secret to children that this problem that is noticeable all over the place is created by, big oil. So when we would ask questions about fish, the vegetation, my dad always had an excuse or something to tell us. So when we asked about why the water is brackish, of course, he'll tell you, it's because the closer you get to the sea, the more, the water gets darker. Makes sense, right? But when we see dead fishes floating around in the lake, we would ask, why come the fishes are dying? Because my dad would say, look, fishes grow old like old people, and they die. That's why they're there. We'll see dead livestock. Same thing. Livestock grow old, they die, and they float around because nobody cares for them. But when you see livestock, pigs, sheep, with all the little kids dead and floating on the river, then you want to ask why they don't grow old before they die. And of course we did ask, and my dad naturally one day told us that it wasn't because those ones were old, but it was because people had begun to encroach on the environment so much that they are getting the gods who live in the swamps and the grooves angry. And these gods just go out at night and kill the livestock and then throw them in the river. Naturally, as children, we were curious and scared and alarmed that, if there are gods in all these places we've been going with our father, what if they jump out of the forest at night? They can't find sheep and they start killing us, So My father would say, don't worry, I'm here, I got a gun, I'll shoot the gods, we'll be fine. So we'll go with him, but there was a night we were passing through a village as we were rowing the boat, him rowing the boat, and we saw daylight in the middle of the night. And of course, again, we asked my dad, how come these villagers don't sleep? They have like daylight. This was from gas flares. And my dad would say, look, this is no problem. What happened is that we used to have what they call the Cold War, and Russians monitors the United States with these lights. And when the Cold War was over, they forgot to extinguish the light. That's why it is there. And we said, why can't somebody just walk up there and put water on it and let it go? Since they're no longer fighting. Of course, my dad knew we would ask more questions. So we would keep asking questions, and particularly we were concerned about the gods who are very angry. And one day, my dad, after persistent questioning, said, look, when God gets angry, they are appeased. And we wanted to know how you can appease the gods. And he told us that every village in Africa, have a chief priest. Looking back now, the chief priest in our village or every other village that I know of is usually the crook in the village who knew how to manipulate people. So the chief priest will be contacted, like the gods are angry again because there was ignorance about these problems. And the chief priest would say, go and bring more livestock. You bring clothes, money to the chief priest, and they will put all of this in a big canoe, and somebody will take the sacrifices now to the gods in the Atlantic Ocean, very, very far. He'll just be rowing his boat until he can go no more. Maybe his boat capsizes, he dies there, and then the villagers will wait for 7 days, they don't see him, they start jubilating, they're happy that the gods have accepted their sacrifices. I would say, for example, if the gods were here in Portland, maybe, they would take, winter jackets, you just put them together because it's always cold around here, So, this happened and we became very, very scared, and we asked my dad, why do they send young people, strong people to take these sacrifices to the gods and they die and the villagers are happy? And they said, well, what happens is that the sacrifices, somebody has to take it to the gods, and the gods lives in terrible places, and they just take the sacrifices and kill the person and just eat all of it together. And we asked him one day if it is possible that if this offering of sacrifices were to be reinstated, if we, his kids, might become victims of the chief priest sent to take the sacrifices to the gods. And my dad said, no, don't worry. I'm going to send you guys to school. You become lawyers, doctors. It's only troubled kids that are sent to take sacrifices to the gods, so we shouldn't worry. I was worried. I told my dad one day that, look, when they finish with all the strong guys in the village, all the good-looking guys are going to come after we, the ugly guys, to take the sacrifices to the gods. He didn't find that funny and keep pestering us. But one day, finally, he confessed to us that there are no gods anywhere. It was a lie. It was the oil companies, multinational corporations that are responsible for all the atrocities that we had pointed out in those journeys and sojourn with my dad. It was shocking because we didn't see their presence as such. But we found out through my dad that the Niger Delta area was like made up of network of pipes, they have been constructing over the years that takes oil from the place where they call the farm, where the drilling actually takes place, to the barge, which takes the oil from the Atlantic Ocean in Nigeria to maybe New Jersey or Amsterdam, or the Caribbean, where it is finally refined and processed and it becomes gas. over here. But also looking back, people, I tend to think that the oil companies act like gods. That is, one, really, when people know their locations, nobody can really touch them. They're protected like those gods that kills the fishes. Also, I very strongly know that they accept human sacrifices. People get killed on behalf of the oil multinational corporations to make profit. And I will describe it to you this way, is the fact that if you ever buy gas that comes from Nigeria or Ecuador or Burma, Myanmar, where those heavy-duty dictators hold sway, for every gallon of gas, there is somebody's blood in there because they have to kill for it. I'm serious. And I'm not saying it to make you feel guilty. I'm saying it because it is the truth. But let me also make a few analogies, just two of them, to make you understand my story about the gods. It's the fact that Iran and Iraq fought a long 8-year war, right, over oil. And one of the prominent things that Iran did against Iraq to defeat the Iraqi army, they used to recruit or collect troubled kids in Tehran on the street and take them to the war front and push them in front of the Iraqi army as sacrifices so that they would defeat the Iraqi armies psychologically, make them feel like you're killing little kids. And they did this many, many times. What would you call that? It's human beings being offered as sacrifices in a war situation, but for one reason only, oil. Because that was a big issue between Iran and Iraq. Maybe to bring it a little bit closer to home is to look at Iraq and this unjust war that is happening there. My understanding, the last time I checked, is that America has come to realize and appreciate the fact that there was no basis for fighting a war in Iraq currently. But there is a basis for securing the oil in Iraq. And that's actually the basis why the war took place. I'm just deducing, I'm just making deduction now, that if the war was based upon falsehood or deceit, all the young people recruited into the army, targeted recruitment, as you know, happens in neighborhoods of poor minority people, mostly, they have been offered as sacrifices on behalf of the oil companies that are operating there. And that's very sad. I made that connection for you so that you don't look at me from some local African man who sleeps on treetops and where people just eat people. That's not the issue. I'm bringing it home to you so that you understand that there's a global connection or global practice of systematic offering of sacrifices for economic reasons. Having done that, I'll take you back to my village. Apart from everything that my dad taught me and I saw of the angry gods, like Shell, Chevron, Ajip, Conoco, ExxonMobil, Elf, think about it. We also had an experience of brutality from the police in my village in 1980. 1980, this was shortly after my dad revealed this to us. We just moved back to the village again, and it was Christmas period. And when it is Christmas, as you all know, people do come home from different parts of the country to just be in a reunion. In Africa, family is a very, very strong issue. So we have huge family reunions. So in our village of about 3,000 people, Christmas period is like double that population because people just drop in, until the New Year's. So we were there, and we have a little economy in the village square every 9 days. That's the marketplace where people it's like a farm market. But the method of exchange is by barter. You give me clothes, I give you yam, or cocoa, or coconut. So, but we would always see police presence, despite the fact that we live in this part of the world where we have so much resources, exploration is going on. The government doesn't give us anything, the oil companies doesn't give us anything. As a matter of fact, the most oil-producing state in Nigeria, known as Bayelsa State, at its capital, had only 3 gas stations. And most of the time, there's no gas in those stations. So we don't have anything in return. And if you go to the Niger Delta, you fly over the Niger Delta area of Nigeria today, you will see pockets of Christmas trees. These are oil platforms. I even heard that some of them have ATM machines, whereas if you take just a hike out of these, automatic platforms, super modern platforms, replete with everything, including prostitutes, you look at the villages and there's nothing in the villages. They don't even have common drinking water. It was so bad that the oil companies lied at a time in Nigeria that there was nowhere in the Niger Delta area that I described to you that has 10,000 lakes where they could find water to provide to the people. They said the water is not drinkable, it cannot be purified. They lied. But there was a time I was at this place where we had to have a little community meeting, and there was a Chevron person there, and they said, repeated the same lie. And I raised up my hand and suggested that since you take crude oil to America in these big barges, big barges, and you drop them off, and you drive the barges back empty to take more oil, can't you put water on your way back from America, drop it off for us too, and we can pay for it? We exchange it, you just take some money out of the oil. But people, this is just part of a lie that perhaps even an electrical company will tell you in this city where even with your education, they will lie to you about what is possible and what is not possible. So going back to this experience in the village, so these young people came during Christmas, saw what the police was doing, extorting women from money from the women, and they drove them away in a peaceful protest. It was like a revolution in the village. People were excited. Finally we don't have to deal with these policemen anymore. It was like a revolution that was not televised. But nobody knew that they had gone back to their station, lied that they were dispossessed of their weapons, because that's one huge crime, I'm sure, everywhere in the world. Like you take weapons of law enforcement agents, you're in big trouble. But it was a lie. So their officers mobilized and came back in the night at about 9 p.m. Almost 300 of them came into the village, and they did anything imaginable. Kicked down doors, beat up people, tortured, broke down houses, and they came to our house. My father had been a target because apart from all this his super talented engagement, extracurricular activities, he's also the village council secretary. So he takes notes and write petitions to the government about what's happening in our village. So they came look for my dad, but my dad knew that he would be targeted, so he'd run out of the house. But unfortunately, my dad couldn't take all of us. His children were 16 in a family. So he had to abandon us, and we were at the mercy of the police. So when they came as the first child, we were living at that time with a 17-year-old cousin of ours. And when they came, they couldn't find my dad, asked us to locate him for them. We said, we don't know his whereabouts. They said, well, we'll teach your family a lesson. And without sounding graphic, this young lady was raped, violated by the police. And I was so bitter and depressed. Reason was that I had been taught in civics class that the police was supposed to protect us, the government was our protector, and here is the government, destroying our lives, violating innocent young lady for a crime she did not commit. So I just at that point internally decided that if I was to grow up alive, I would do everything I can to fight the power that did that in my village. The opportunity came in 1989 when I was a freshman in college. I was admitted to the University of Lagos, big university, 27,000 students there. And on the day of our admission, all of you know with freshmen, you're just excited and you just chat. Where do you come from? Chat. So I was hanging out and chatting with a lot of people from different parts of the country because as a rule, the university must take people from all parts of the country in what they call the quota system. It's like affirmative action kind of thing here. So we're there talking, and interestingly, everybody just had a terrible story to tell about how their families been abused, extorted, arrested, detained without regard to rules, regulations, and laws of the country. And I concluded from my experience that day as a freshman that Nigeria was a federal republic of injustice. But how do we address this injustice? There was something that had to happen as freshmen. It had nothing to do with justice. It was a party. There's a ritual on our campus in those days that you must go for a party on your first day in school. We call it the October Rush, because October is the month that begins the semester for, the academic section for freshmen, October Rush, simply, I'll describe it to you, is the time that freshmen go to party with, men go after ladies, and, you get to get somebody hooked up, for the rest of your time on campus, possibly if it works out. And so it is usually like big deal. So people would go borrow money, borrow clothes, just to impress, the opposite sex and, get numbers and process it from there. You know it, all of you have been freshmen. I see a few freshmen nodding their heads, So, but what happened was that I wasn't interested in going to the October Rush party because of my background being a poor person. I was very poor. I didn't have the capacity to spend money if I wanted. So I was there just contemplating what to do, and then it was light out. They took light on campus because our electrical infrastructure is really bad in Nigeria, so light is always going on and off. So we were there. And as light went off, came this student. He's been on campus. He just rushed towards me as if he was psychic. He knew what was going on in my mind. And he said, young man, can I talk to you? And I said, fine, talk to me, and I started whispering in my ears, and I felt as though, you would think he wanted to sell to me, like cocaine, It's like, and I said, what is it? And he said, there is somebody who's coming to campus to talk to us. Activist students on campus about what is happening in the larger society. He wants to come and talk about the World Bank and the IMF. And I said, okay, that's fine. I would like to hear him speak. And he said, okay, why don't you invite your friends? My friends weren't interested in activism. They were interested in, the ladies. So I followed this guy, and what he did impressed me. What he did was this. He took me to about 4 different rooms. Because in those days, it was a crime to bring in a public speaker who doesn't support the government to campus. Just like I'm standing in front of you, it's not allowed if I'm not here praising the government in Nigeria under military rule. So they took me to about 4 different rooms as a security measure, to be sure that I'm not a secret agent, who would expose them. So when we finally got to this small room, there were 10 people seated there, hush tone, And there was this great speaker who had come from town, big lawyer, human rights lawyer, smuggled into campus. And across from the room, I was hearing people clapping and singing hallelujah. And I said, why don't you guys go and stop those people? Because they are distracting our attention. I said, shut up. That is distraction against the government. Because when they hear the guys clapping hallelujah, they look at it and say, okay, these are like, students who are Christians. And Christians are not people who are dangerous. So they let them go. That's how, but I must tell you that I was impressed. And I listened to this speaker talk about the structural adjustment program of the World Bank and the IMF that they were imposing upon Nigeria. Structural adjustment programs are programs designed by the World Bank and the IMF. The IMF is the International Monetary Fund. I call it the International Monetary Fraud. They have intervened in all these third world countries with economic policies that have no bearing whatsoever on their lives. And one of their conditionality, first and foremost, is that they're just like a loan shark. They'll give you loans on conditionalities that, okay, you do this, you do that. One of them is that you devalue your currency. So your currency will have no value against the dollar. And anybody who produces anything from here can come and dump it on your country and get away with it. So that was primarily their role. At that time, the IMF was intervening in virtually every African economy. And things were getting really, really bad. So this guy told us that the federal government of Nigeria was going to take a loan from the World Bank, $120 million, to reform the education sector. The word reform, don't forget. And we had 28 universities at that time for serving 120 million people. America is like 280 million people, and I heard you have 3,000 universities, and they are not enough. We have 28 only, and they're not really big universities. So condition one is that the universities will be reduced from 28 to 5. Before you say, wow, these 5 universities are just going to teach people technical stuff. Because they have designed and decided in their brains that all these liberal art colleges that teaches sociology and psychology make people crazy. And when you have too many psychologists and sociologists in a country, they ask too many questions and they breed terrorism. They are just dissidents. So, but if we have only 5 universities that are like science and technologically oriented, we're just creating people who want to work and not people who want to ask questions. You're going to have people who just want to work. So that was part of their calculation. So this guy said to us, and I cannot forget, he said, look, one of the reasons why I'm upset about this loan is the fact that $120 million is not even enough for American movie stars to sniff cocaine in Aspen, Colorado every winter. Why should you tie the future of a country to this stupid loan? We must resist it. That was my initiation into the resistance movement in Nigeria. I was fired up. I said, yes, we'll do it. So after he left successfully, we started having more meetings and mobilizing people in the national protest that was planned to resist the World Bank, called the Anti-SAP Riot of 1989. Pretty popular. Being that I was a freshman who did very well in attending all these meetings, I was allowed to stand in front in the peaceful protests that took place on this particular day. So our duty, with 2,000 students, we divided the students who were willing to about 5 groups so that if one cannot beat the police cordon, the other one would be able to do it. So we succeeded in getting off the campus, and we were going and singing, and carrying placards and denouncing the World Bank. And as we approached the city center, we met the kill and go police again. All of them armed to the teeth, equivalent of what you call SWAT here, looking really scary. And they said, you guys should disperse. And we were like there, talking rhetorics. about how we have fundamental human rights to protest. We can't disperse. If you want to disperse, you can join us if you like. If you're worried about security, they weren't joking, people. They opened fire on us. 8 people were killed. We didn't know that they had infiltrated the protest. So those of us who were like the ringleaders wanted to run away. They just like arrested us in the confusion, in the melee, and took us to the police zonal headquarters in Lagos and put us in this small cell. They packed us, you think, we are like Shandin, in this small cell, about 120 of us, and they threw canisters of tear gas in that place. And people just kind of passed out. So when we resurrected, they now took us out one after the other to undergo my first experience of interrogation. The interrogation process was very, very simple. I am supposed to admit to a signed statement. All they needed was my signature. They have already made it up that I am planning to overthrow the government, the military government. And that offense is treason, and it carries the death penalty. I wasn't willing to say that. So they said, you got to sign this document. Apparently, the military government had made a decree at that time that the crime of conspiracy doesn't require you to be with another person. You can actually conspire with yourself or within yourself. So I'm facing conspiracy charges because I'm a genius who can conspire within myself to overthrow the government. It was shocking. But as I was there also arguing, they put me in a holding room. And in the holding room, I met with another group of very, very brutal officers who beat the heebie-jeebies out of me. So I was bloodied, and I'm sure the other fellas went through the same experience. But interestingly, about 2 hours later, we were all brought together in this room, in their conference room, police conference room, and said, we're allowed to go. And we said, why? And they said, well, what happened is that the American and the British government had condemned through their embassies the way we were rough-handled and what they call high-handedness on the part of the security agents. It was the first time I saw and noticed Western hypocrisy. Because I'm there looking at it and say, we were handcuffed to the station. Look at those handcuffs, they were made in America. You look at it, the guns were made in the West. The tear gas were made. So you make guns, handcuff, and ship it to all these dictators, and you don't expect them to kill people with it? It doesn't make sense to me. But this is what made sense. When I got home that night, the natural lie of every 18-year-old, if you have injuries that you can't explain, you say that you fell from the bus. So my uncle saw me. I saw my uncle first. What happened to you? I said, I fell from the bus, trying to get out of the protest on campus. It was a lie. Then got inside, I saw my dad. He was reading a letter of expulsion sent to him in the village. My father lives 300 miles from Lagos. And let me give you an idea. If you send a letter to my village in 1989, it took probably 3 to 6 months to get there because they call it snail mail, real snail mail. But in this instance, my father got a letter of expulsion addressed to me same day. And he was in Lagos with it because he was shocked. I was a little guy who was very shy, who only asked intelligent questions, now a terrorist who had to be expelled from the university. But I continued regardless in the resistance movement. I became the student union president and led plenty of protests. And I got into plenty of trouble as well. I went to detention, real prison, 8 different times between 1989 and 1999 when I came to the US. And I was beaten, tortured, harassed, threatened, pressured, everything unimaginable has happened to me because of the cause that I chose. One of the causes was to bring democracy and human rights to the people of Nigeria, and perhaps my cousin who was raped. And the response of our government against all of this was to brutalize me and a lot of my friends, and a lot of people were killed. So we're just like the few lucky ones who were in this trade of fighting for our rights and justice that are still alive today. On one instance, I was attacked by gangs set up by the government because at the point, it became embarrassing for them to send you to jail and you come back and address students and tell them how great it is to go to jail and be back and how your conviction had grown from strength to strength. So they then started hiring gangs, what you can call surrogate repression, to carry out attacks on student activists on campus. So at one point, they attacked me physically, stabbed me on my head, left a knife there, and I had to be running around with a knife hanging on my head. And they also pinned me down and injected me with an unknown chemical substance. That is how I ended up in the United States to seek treatment for all the effects of the torture that I went through. But the US experience is the fact that just as I was coming in 1999, US was undergoing huge change. One of the biggest changes was the fact that the 2000 elections was taking place, and unknown to all of you, the White House was going to be taken over by the oil corporations. I knew it because I had seen and known some of the characters you have here now in government operate in Nigeria. Because at that time, Condoleezza Rice was a member of board of Chevron, and she actually had a badge named after her. It's called MV Rice, bringing blood and oil from Nigeria to this country. Dick Cheney, your vice president, used to be the chairman of Halliburton, and Halliburton is responsible for about 90% of the pipeline layout in what they call oil services in Niger Delta region. So, and we know that they used to give out helicopters to the national police to go and kill villagers if it is necessary. So I was depressed and I almost cried when I saw the lineup of people who were going to take over power in 2000. But I had no political clout, I had no political power, I had no political right, and I cannot vote. But I was speaking in those days against torture, and I used the opportunity to remind Americans not to make that mistake. Because I said, look, the day of inauguration will look like the annual general meeting of Shell. And that is what happened. Because it had happened in our country. But I preached also against complacency by Americans, that people should just stand up and be wary and be conscious and get awareness for themselves about happenings in other parts of the world. Because if we don't, it could get to us. It was as if I was psychic, because then came September 11, sad event. I was a student at Columbia University, and I was walking into the student center when the second plane hit. And as a matter of fact, I was one of the people who tried to donate blood, but the New York system doesn't take blood of immigrants who come from malaria-infested West Africa. So they don't accept our blood. But that's fine. And then other things followed, and that was the fact that the now surreptitiously began to creep into Americans' life. It was such that Americans were hit by terrorists, and the government, instead of protecting and helping Americans to recover, began to hit Americans too. One of the best and only documented first beneficiary of American government magnanimity were families of Osama bin Laden, who were moved out of this country 2 hours after the attack. I also heard that the airline industry got $10 billion of free money from the US government to boost the airline industry. But what did the American citizens get? The US Patriot Act, in which the government of this country can actually peep into your pots and tell what you're cooking. They are deciding for you what kind of books to read in the name of national security. As you look at it, why should you protect your citizens away from their rights? How do people get hit and you go after them with laws that takes away further and erodes away on their right? It is for a simple reason, because it was time to decimate a growing movement in America. Which was this movement? It was a movement that proudly took on the WTO, the World Bank, and the IMF, and all other transnational deceptive agencies in Washington, Seattle. So no matter how bad I feel about Americans, I'm always proud to know that some young people in this country took on power on the street of Washington, Seattle. You can call them whatever you like, or they can call them whatever they like. Terrorists, anarchists, conspiracy theorists. But it was those heroic actions that led to the forgiveness of lots of the debt that been hanging out around the neck of third world countries. It was the actions of students, young people in this country in Washington, Seattle. It changed the world. But September 11 gave them the opportunity to decapitate that movement. And as we speak today, we don't even know where the movement is, because everybody's just scared. But it is possible for us to get back on track if only as students you take a rightful place in society. I have been in the university, what you call college here in America too. I went to Columbia University for 2 years doing a master's degree. And I see the amount of complacency that has bedeviled the students' movement. The students on this campus. I imagine sometimes when I walk into a campus and I see fanciful or serious security gadget, and I ask, why did you have to build fortresses on these campuses? And they will say to me, look, students used to be crazy in this country during the Vietnam War. They really fought the government, and these things are anti-riot proof. And I say to myself, sometimes when I come to these speeches and I say, how come the injustice that is happening now is twice the period of Vietnam and nobody is rioting? You know why? It's because all of you are in a lockdown with Starbucks coffee, the cell phone, iPod, and when you get home at night, you got 1,000 channels to flip around on cable vision. How can you possibly care about the world? Because you have already been surrounded. You've been placed in your bubble in various parts of your little world. And the bubble has a membrane. The more ignorant or fearful you become, the thicker the membrane. And then inside that bubble, they put you in a box. And you don't even know that there's a world outside of here. It was the first time in my life that I knew that America is the world. Because you know what? When I got to New York, the New York Yankees will play the Mets, or what do they call it in basketball, and they'll call it the World Series in New York. And I'm looking at, don't these guys know there's a world beyond New York? But that's the truth. This is the nature of being in bubbles and boxes. And on my way here, I was told that every college has its own bubble too. Like I went to Walla Walla, they have the Whitman bubble. We went to Olympia, they have their own bubble there. I guess you have a Lewis and Clark bubble too. But I'm here to tell you that you can break out of a bubble without consequences. It's no longer a crime to step out. And the best way to step out is to understand your addictions In this case, America's addiction is to oil. And George Bush magnanimously has admitted that we're addicted. But if you're addicted to something, you got to set up a double A of that thing, you know? If you're addicted to sex, you got to do Sex Anonymous, you know? To alcohol, you got to do Alcoholic Anonymous. So if you're addicted to oil, we got to do Oil Anonymous. And I'm here as your therapist to take you through the steps that are necessary. One of it is that you should stop driving SUVs. Win yourself. Americans are lovely people. You know why? Because Ford used to make cars in 1925 that had better gas mileage than in 2006. Why? Because of the bubble that they put you in. Because they know you love it. I have seen people who drive F-150s and they put tools at the back because it is hip, not because they ever do any construction work. I've seen people who drive 4x4s and they've never climbed a mountain in their life and probably would never do so. And I watch TV at night sometimes and I see people selling stuff and they will speak for 2 hours. And they say, you know, you can make 500,000. They bring testimonials of people who have made money, and they can never mention the product that they're selling. I said, America is beautiful because they are attacking your consumption addiction. It is not only oil that we are addicted to, people, to be honest with you. We are addicted to a lot of things. I am addicted too because I have a wardrobe full of clothes that I don't need. You know, there was a time I used to carry 3 credit cards, and I'm wondering, I don't need more than one. Now I don't even have a credit card anymore. I have a debit card. Thank God that you can get points on your debit cards, you know. But whatever points I gain, I lose it through overdrawing my account because I'm always broke, you know. But it is just to explain to you how some of these conveniences just puts you in vulnerable position. And our greatest enemy in all of this are 2 basic things. We are too fearful and sometimes too ignorant. And some of you might look at me and hate me and want to choke me and say, how can you say we're ignorant when you're talking to us on a campus and this is supposed to be a private school? Yes, I know what I'm talking about. Because there are 2 different things between being literate, functionally, and being educated. I can tell you with authority because I went to Columbia University, Ivy League school, so to speak, for 2 years. Sometimes, a lot of times I feel like it's wasted 2 years. Because I got to meet some of the guys from Wall Street who sniffed cocaine all their life. They don't know jack. You know, but they're my professors, you know, teaching me about 2 + 2, it makes 5. And they keep telling me that it is true, whereas it is not, because it's Ivy League. And I met a lot of kids of rich people, and I feel like the Ivy League school is a dumping ground for rich people who have nothing to do with their kids. It's just like an adult daycare center, you know? For children of rich people. Because you look at it and see the way people speak about even events happening around them, you understand why it's a daycare center. For example, at Columbia, you find some kids who've never been to Harlem before in New York because they've been conditioned to believe that at Harlem, where there are a lot of black people, is made of cannibals. They will eat you raw if you get there. And it's 6 blocks from Columbia University. And then they'll stand up in class and tell me, oh my God, we're going to save Africa. You know, I'm going to join the Peace Corps. I say, stop it. You're not saving no Africa. If you want to save people, go teach in Harlem at your spare time. There are a lot of kids who their parents are in jail who needs your help. But it is part of the messianic culture here where people just tell you that, look, America is helping the world, you know. And then when anybody complains around the world, they say, why are they hating us? You know, you see, this is a problem. We're helping them too much. No, people, you're not really helping anybody. The truth is that we're in a world in which there's give and take. You probably take more from other people than you give back. For every dollar of aid that you give to people around the world, you take a lot back. And that's why you see in Rwanda, America did not intervene because Rwanda didn't have gold or silver to offer. In Sudan, America doesn't want to intervene because the Sudanese mullahs have oil, and they don't want to offend the big oil corporations. Because you know that ExxonMobil makes quarterly profits close to the budget of 10 African countries. Just one quarter. I didn't make this up. So to break our addiction, we have to take action. And in taking action, we have to make sure that we don't stop, that we use our consumption power. I encourage people to boycott companies that are involved in human rights abuses or are in bed with dictatorships around the world. It is difficult to say which country is actually not bad these days because even America is in the business of torture and violation of human rights to the extent that at the United Nations Human Rights Commission, there was a time, I think 2 years ago, that Cuba was the chairman and Zimbabwe was a prominent member and the US was kicked out because there was no reason to keep the US there. They were doing the same things Cuba were doing. Let me joke with you about the president of Zimbabwe who announced in 2004 that he would like to send election monitors to monitor the US elections in 2004. When they asked him why, he said, well, we rig our elections the same way. So if they want to come here, we want to see how they do their own too. Because also democracy was being decimated in this country. In fact, Nigeria has returned to democratic rule, so to speak, but we don't call it a democracy, we call it a kleptocracy because it's a government of kleptomaniacs by kleptomaniacs for kleptomaniacs. Okay? And you can look around your own area too and design your own kind of government and put crazy at the back. You can call it, if there's too many McDonald's controlling your life, you can call it McDonald's crazy or KFC crazy. So this is just, in a way, my way of reaching out to you across the land to let you know that we are all involved in this together. Just as big oil is destroying my environment and giving bullets to soldiers to kill the people in the villages and using helicopters to raid our villages, their action, which is burning of fossil fuel, reckless consumption of fuel, is burning a hole through your skies. And all of us are endangered. You saw it in New Orleans. Those things didn't happen by accident. What happened in New Orleans was as a result of global warming. The globe is warming up. And the water bodies are getting bigger, voluminous, and we might get consumed. Okay, before you accuse me of peddling fear, I just want to leave you with the songs of Bob Marley. It's just a part of redemption song, and it says, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our own mind. Have no fear for atomic energy, because none of them can stop the time. For how long shall they kill our prophets while we stand aside and look? Some say it's just part of it. We got to fulfill the book. Won't you help to sing the songs of freedom